Welcome to the Teen Life Podcast, where we explore your questions to help you make meaningful connections with teenagers, because no teen deserves to feel alone. Have a question you'd like us to address? Email us at podcast@teenlife.ngo. Now, let's jump into this week's question.
You've been mentioning boundaries on the podcast, but can you give some examples of what that looks like? Hi, welcome back. This week again, you are stuck with me, Caleb, and Karlie. No, Tobin.
We miss you, Tobin.
We do miss you, Tobin. But yeah, we've been talking about boundaries a lot. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about talking about sex and relationships with your teen, in which we talked about boundaries a bit. But we wanted to also, give you guys a little bit more about what boundaries are, because I think they also extend beyond just relationships. So boundaries, to kind of define them, they aren't about control. They're about love and clarity, because teens don't always show it, but they do like structure and they function better with structure. Mm-hmm. One of the ways that I like to view boundaries are kind of as guardrails, right? Like, even if you think about on a highway or things like that, they keep you on path. They make sure you don't go off-roading off of where you're supposed to go. And we'll kind of talk about this later, but you have to know where you want to go before you can know what is going to take you off track. And so for me, one of the things about defining a boundary, whether it's in school, in relationships, emotionally, technologically, whatever, you have to decide, where's my goal? Like, what do I want from this? And then define, how do I get there? And what are the things that are going to keep me off track? And so those boundaries are making sure that you stay focused on the goal.
Well, and if you're using the example of a guardrail, you don't want to hit a guardrail, but if you hit a guardrail, you're not falling to your death.
Yeah.
But the guardrail, the where you really don't want to be is in that canyon or over the side of the mountain. And so you set your guardrail just in enough to protect you from going that far.
Right.
And so it's not necessarily, you don't put your guardrail in the canyon and be like, oh, well, if you get there, it's already too late. Bummer.
Yeah,
and
the car is torn to pieces, but at least I didn't go further down the canyon. Yeah.
Right. So if you're thinking in terms of a classroom, if you don't want just utter chaos, then you need to set boundaries in enough to keep some peace, as an example. And so that's a good point, Caleb. I really like that imagery of a guardrail, and it's to keep you safe and make sure everyone's on the same page. In teen life groups, we call them norms, because sometimes, I don't know that term honestly is that much better, but sometimes when teens hear boundaries or rules, hey, we're going to set some group rules, they're like, what rules?
Norms is fun to say too.
Yeah.
So we're from just boundaries.
Yes.
Let's talk about our norms.
It's just what everyone is agreeing on, of this is what is going to be our normal. And then you can move forward from there.
Yeah. And I think too, one of the most important things, especially again, like Karlie said, like, you're setting the boundaries here. Make sure you're setting them at the beginning of the group, or at the beginning of a school year, at the beginning of, introducing technology, at the beginning. Make sure everyone's on the same page, because it's easier to set boundaries first, right? Because again, if we're going guardrail, we want to make sure we don't fall off the bridge. And then if we realize, maybe we have a little more space, we can move them a little bit further. Right, it's easier to set boundaries and loosen up on them later than to crack down after unstated boundaries or norms have been set. I remember starting out as a student minister right out of college, and I'm leading a middle school small group, middle school boys.
Okay.
And, I'm 23 at the time, but, I have the maturity level of a middle school boy. So, I'm sitting there, I could talk Skibbity Riz, Ohio with them all day, whatever. And I remember there was specifically like one small group where, I hadn't really established boundaries. And if you don't establish a norms will be set, right? Regardless, like, they will be set. Norms will be established, because this is going to be what is normal in this group. And so if you don't establish them, they're going to get set where you do not want them. And so I remember we do our highs and lows, whoops and poops, whatever you call them.
My
That's a good one. I could go on for
word.
days. Rose and a thorn, happy crappy. There's a lot. Okay, there's good. I could keep going. Okay, whoops and poops is my favorite because they go, here's my whoop for the week. You know, had a really good lunch, and here's my poop, and then people get a chuckle because you're talking about your poop. So, any group leaders out there, you can thank me later for the whoop and the poop.
Okay.
Anyways, we do that, and then we're trying to I'm trying to transition into my small group questions about the lesson that I assume did such a good job at. And I ask them the first question, and they are just off the rails. Just could not care any less about what I have to say. They're talking to each other. And I remember I say, guys, seriously, we need to focus. They're like, oh, he's serious. Oh, Caleb's serious. And I was like, my word. Because I had established this norm in this relationship with him that I'm just a bud. And this norm that there's no respect, that there doesn't need to be respect between them and me, between them and each other. And like, I remember this set me off. And
You were triggered.
I set the small group guy down. And I said, we're done. Y'all can do whatever. And I had to go to the bathroom because I could feel my temper rising. I went to the bathroom. I took a few deep breaths. And I go back out there, and they're all just sitting there. And they're like, what in the world? They don't know what to do. Like, can we really go play foosball now? I go, and I was like, it's the first time I've ever gained access to, I call it like my dad voice. I raise my voice, very stern, say, listen, like, I don't want this to just be school. I don't want you to feel like you have to be there. I can't make you be here at Jinx Church in the youth group. Like, you chose to be here, but I want this to be a space where we respect each other and you respect me, and at least give each other that. And I just kind of remember, you know, they were shocked. I think one kid who was kind of the ringleader of the chaos, like, his face turned red. I think he started to cry a little, felt a little good, but you know, it's harder to crack down on things if you haven't established the boundaries.
Right.
First. And, you know, if we're talking boundaries at school, boundaries in, you know, a small group setting, learn from my mistakes and set expectations and boundaries for respect. You don't have to agree on everything, but we will listen and respond with respect to me, to each other.
Right. This is a big one in our teen life groups. And often what I say is, you don't have to be here. I don't have to be here. So let's respect each other and let's respect our time. I'm going to respect your time. I'm asking that you respect my time while we're here. And so even giving that back makes a difference. If you're not just saying you need it, and you said that, Caleb, but you're not just saying you will respect me.
Yeah.
Because I'm an adult, but be like, I'm also going to respect you. I'm not going to make you do something you don't want to do.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bore you using things that are, we're going to do this together and I'm going to give you that same back. Not interrupting when someone is speaking plays into that. So if you're wanting to like drill down of like what goes into respect, not interrupting when someone's speaking, using I statements instead of blaming. I feel instead of you always do this, like if you're talking in a group, not laughing or mocking other people's thoughts or experiences. Oftentimes you're not even, but this is something that happens a lot in groups. Side talk, where two people are talking to each other and they start laughing while someone else is sharing, and they are probably not laughing about what that student is sharing. But if they are sharing something serious and there's laughter, they're immediately thinking they're laughing at me. And I've had to stop down a group before to say, hey, you're not paying attention. And this is probably, and asking that student, hey, how did you feel when they were laughing? And having that, like just pointing that out. And those students, it was girls, and they were like, that's not what we were talking about. And I was like, I get that, but that's not also respectful that you're laughing and having your own conversation while she's trying to share something that's important to her. And so, but if you say that up front, then you can also come back to, we talked about this, remember? No side talking. That's something we agreed on as a group, and you can point it out and then you can just move on. You're not having to like stop down and make this a big deal. Another example that I gave, and this kind of also goes into like making sure everyone feels safe to share, especially in a group or in a school setting. One time I had a student that I asked a question. I honestly don't remember what the question was. Maybe it was about relationships. And the student goes, well, I know that he doesn't have a relationship with his dad. and pointed out something about another student. And so I quickly was like, okay, hang on. You can only share about yourself. We're not sharing someone else's story. That is not
Mm.
your job. That is not your role to make sure everyone feels safe, that they don't have someone else who's going to be like, well, she just broke up with her boyfriend and here's
Yeah.
why. We're not getting into that. And so if they don't feel comfortable speaking, don't make them speak. That's a big thing.
The worst.
I know, but like
Yeah. It
I
needs.
say I say that. I straight up say, I
Yeah.
am not going to make you talk if you don't want to talk. If you tell me I don't want to talk about that, I will move on.
Mhm.
And that's an easy boundary to make sure everyone feels safe. But participation too. I often say,
Yeah.
but you will participate. You're going
Hmm.
to fill out the sheet. You're going to write
Yeah.
something down. And then there are certain things where if we do an icebreaker of, hey, just tell me something good that happened this week, you can participate in that. You can come
Hmm.
up with,
Yes.
I had a good night's sleep.
You're right. That and
I ate
that's
Taco Bell for lunch. It was great.
there has to be something good. Yeah, when we do
Yes.
when we do, there are times, yes, to pick and choose. But I get, from the one side, you're like, I want everyone to participate and get the most out of this. But I promise you, you making a student who doesn't want to talk is maybe for them going to be getting the least out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they don't want to talk, and people are different. And so forcing someone to talk who might just be sitting back and still being active, but not necessarily showing it in the way that you want to is perfectly fine. And it sets the expectation, right? That, hey, I'm not going to push you where you don't want to be pushed, but
Mm-hmm.
I am going to also set the expectation of wanting you to be part of the group
Mm-hmm.
and knowing that you're still part of the group, even if you're maybe not actively participating in a discussion that you don't be a part of. Like it will be okay. And I like what you said too about still finding ways to involve them in the small things that, and set the expectations that you should participate
Mm-hmm.
in talking about your Taco Bell cheesy gordita crunch. Okay.
Wonderful.
We can find ways. Yeah. And I
And
think
then I
even
think,
part of that is making sure if it's in a group setting that they're part of the circle.
yeah.
That's a norm that I've noticed is good. And, if someone comes in late, if someone doesn't is automatically placing themselves outside of the group, even just making sure, hey, here we all sit in the circle.
Mm-hmm.
And even the small thing of making sure it is a circle to make sure everyone feels a part, making sure everyone can see each other and a conversation is being made is just another good norm.
And then I think a final one for school group,
Hmm.
church groups that is key is what's shared in this group stays in this group. I always, so this is another boundary and maybe practical piece. In my teen life groups, I always follow that up with, unless you're talking about hurting yourself or hurting someone else or someone hurting you. And then I do have to share that. So I let them know up front. We talked about that last episode a
Yeah.
little bit. Like if someone is in danger or their safety is at risk, I will share that. But what's said in this group stays in this group, which means I'm not going to go call your parent, but also you're not going to go outside of here and gossip and tell people what we talked about.
Yeah.
Everyone
Yeah.
needs to feel safe in this classroom. And that's not a like we're hiding something, but just if you're talking about sensitive topics, if someone is talking about, hey, I'm really struggling in this class and I need help, we don't need to go share that outside of this classroom.
Yeah.
That can stay here and we can get that student the help that they need
Hmm.
without going and being like, you'll never guess what grade so and so got. And he just got reamed by the teacher. Like, that's not, we don't need to go sharing
Yeah.
that stuff. It's great.
Yeah.
It can stay here.
And I think too, like even going back to what we said initially about boundaries, and we're gonna just, we talked about school, church, kind of a group setting, and we're gonna give you more examples. But again, if you look back at it through this lens of what's the goal, right? Asking yourself when we're setting a boundary, like what do we want to be true about this classroom, about this group, right? We want to be a safe space where everyone respects and trusts each other, and we can, you know, discuss freely and get somewhere, right? And then you'll notice we're setting expectations for respect, clear expectations so everyone feels safe, making sure no one is talking when others are talking. It all helps you achieve that goal. And as we're talking boundaries, we're asking ourselves what are the regrets or things we want to avoid,
Mm-hmm.
and what are the boundaries that align with those goals. And so as we continue to talk about all these other different boundaries, again, that's the lens that we're kind of looking at it through, and it can apply to so much more than just what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So another way that I think we see boundaries played out, especially with parents, teens, adults, and teens, is technology. Setting boundaries on technology, and what do we want? We've done a lot of episodes on technology, and I think one of the things that we ask ourselves is, how do we get technology to work for us?
Mm-hmm.
Versus the other way around. Because teens often push for more tech freedom, but they need guidance to avoid burnout, harmful content, unhealthy habits. So, what are some norms or boundaries that we can establish with technology?
I think I admittedly have not finished this book, so I'm going to say this and know that I am still working on it. But The Anxious Generation came out last year, and it was a big book that a lot of people are reading. It is dense. I will warn you. Like, it has studies,
A lot
which
of
is
stats.
great. Lots of stats, but good stuff. Like, everything I've read, I'm like, wow. But one thing that was brought up in that book that I was like, man, that is so true, is this generation of parents went like, I'm not going to let my student or my child play in the street because that's dangerous. They could get kidnapped.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hand them this phone or this iPad or this TV that has Netflix and a million different shows, and that's safer. And we didn't put boundaries on them.
Yeah.
Like, you handed this, and I'm saying you in general, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that every parent did this, but we handed kids technology that we didn't fully understand without giving them boundaries and guardrails to protect them, like you would out in the real world. And you tighten down in one area and then went free reign. Here you
Yeah.
go. YouTube, just have fun, and it's safer, and it's way, way more dangerous. Like, when I'm
Yeah.
looking at some of the things that my kids could accidentally stumble on our Apple TV with me in the room, I'm like, go play in the street. That might be safer. I don't know. And so when we're talking about technology, making sure, like Caleb was saying, the goal is for them to use it for them. The goal is not to form a new addiction. It's not to have access to stuff that they shouldn't have access to. It is for connection. I feel like we've talked about this before, but especially with technology, some families choose to do a technology contract. Schools, a lot of time, this choice is taken away from you because the school has policies of maybe it's a phone holder in your classroom, or maybe they turn them in, or maybe they can't bring them to school at all. So you might not have as much say in this, but there are ways that we can do technology well that also works for the teen. Because if you just say, sorry, zero
Right.
technology ever, that's probably also not realistic. And
And
so
helping
talking
them, even that contract helps them understand and come, like, it's an agreed decision between the both of you. But I think even with some good ideas, and again, you have to decide for yourself, what is the goal that you're setting, and then build the boundaries around them. And so, as we're talking, we're just giving ideas, but creating phone free zones, even applies back to the last one, in small groups and schools, things like that of, you know, are these working for us or against us? No phones at the dinner table, no phones whenever you're going to sleep. Where would you benefit from most of not having your phone? And establishing that can be good. Setting boundaries around new apps, social media, making sure that we're not spending too much time on one thing and are prioritizing other things beyond that. And one of the difficulties with this is especially modeling it in your life as well.
Right. As a parent, if you say, hey, we're going to have phone free zones, we're not going to have our phone at the table, but you have your phone and you're texting at the table, or someone calls you and you step away to take a phone call, like, you have to model that too. As a teacher, if you say, hey, in my classroom, we're not going to do phones. Now, there are maybe times where something big is happening at home and I have to have my phone out today. Tell them that. They're old enough to take that. But knowing that this also applies to me. If you're worried, I think about this a lot. And so this is something I'm admitting on the podcast that I need to work on. It scares me to think about my kids one day driving with a phone, thinking them looking at their phone, texting, scrolling, but I have to model that first. So if in my mind, I'm a better driver. I'll only look at it when I'm stopped at stoplights or when I'm going slow, or if I'm just trying to find the song real quick on Spotify.
Yeah.
But your student, your teen is watching you going, oh, well, I can have my phone out while I'm driving
Mhm.
because mom does or dad
Yeah.
does. And so modeling that is almost the hardest part because you have to be intentional about what you're doing too,
Yes.
but that matters a lot. And then when it comes to relationships, we talked about when we did the talking about sex and relationships
Mhm.
episode that we want teens to have healthy relationships.
Yep.
That's the goal.
Yes.
And without guidance, so not just in romantic relationships, but we don't want them to have toxic friendships. We don't want them to feel pressured to say yes because they feel pressure from their friends. And so setting boundaries, that is the goal, that we want you to have healthy relationships. We want you to be able to stand up for yourself. And so maybe one is teaching them that they don't have to immediately respond to text
Mhm.
or be available all the time.
Yes. I
Of
think, like, yeah, of just this expectation of I'm always needed, because especially if we're
right.
talking of a relationship, even friendships can get this way of feeling, this thing of codependency, or of this person needs me. I always need to have and be readily available for this person, and just getting them to evaluate, like, hey, it's okay. Like, it's going to be okay to prioritize yourself first. And then also, like, especially in relationships, it's a little different than all of these other boundaries we've talked about, because it involves more than just you, right? You're having to set a boundary for yourself and another person or people. So especially with boundaries in relationships, whether it's friendships or romantic, is making sure that they're, communicated, and
Mhm.
empowering your teenager and teenagers, like making sure that like, you know where the line is, what you want out of this relationship. And hey, that's not okay for you to talk to me like that. That's not okay
Mhm.
for us to do that. And if you don't know those and they haven't been communicated, then you're going to find yourself crossing those boundaries.
Mhm.
And then also, like, yeah, don't lie to yourself as a teenager or as a person. Like, have your teenager walk through those things. Hey, out of this relationship, out of this friendship, what do you want? How can we get there? And then have them really process that, and, make sure they're like, hey, don't tell me what you think I want to hear. Like, you have to come to these conclusions on your own, or they'll never happen.
Right. And I think you're totally right of here's what I want from this relationship and thinking about that beforehand and
Yeah.
talking about it. We talk about this a lot, or it doesn't seem easy, but maybe more intuitive to do with romantic relationships,
Yeah.
especially when you're in middle school and high school. Like, here's the boundary, here's the line I don't want to cross physically. So I'm going to talk about that. But it could also mean I'm a middle schooler. We're not going to hang out more than once a week. I don't need to be hanging out with someone I like every day
Yeah.
of the week or on phone calls for 2 hours every night.
Yeah.
But it could also look like I have a friend that I really care about, but requires a lot of my time.
Mhm.
And I'm going to set a boundary of after 9 o'clock, I'm not answering that friend. I'll get back to them the next day because I
Yeah.
need a break, or I have to set that boundary. Or if they ask me to hang out, I'll hang out with them one on one once a week. Or maybe I
Mhm.
don't hang out with that friend one on one ever because they pressure me to do stuff I know I shouldn't do. So knowing here's what I want from this relationship, here's what I feel like I can handle. And if it goes past that, then we're getting into dangerous territory. And so that's where I'm going to set the guardrail.
And again, for teens, like, if you establish those, that then becomes the expectation, right,
Mm-hmm.
from that friend. And so once that's happened, you're more likely, that friend is less likely to push you
Mm-hmm.
in a relationship as well, because it's been set and it's been expected. Man, after 9, like, I know Caleb can't be reached. And tell your teen, hey, blame it on me. I take your phone. I'm the one, even if it's not necessarily true, right? Like, it's okay. And so, but once the expectation is set, usually the other side, the other party, begins to expect that.
Now, when it comes to boundaries and when you're trying to decide on boundaries and set them, especially from adult to teenager,
Mm-hmm.
say what you mean and do it and set that very clear and consistent.
Yeah.
We've talked about setting it from the beginning. Curfew is a really easy example. If you have a student who's starting to drive, setting a curfew from the beginning and setting clear expectations is easier than when they come home at 2 a.m. and you're going, what in the world? And they're like, well, you didn't tell me I had to be home by a certain time. And in your mind, you're like, well, 2 a.m. is way too late. But that is a different conversation than if you had said up front, your curfew is 10 p.m.
Mhm.
If you're late, then we'll talk about consequences. And then they know the expectation. And when they show up late, say, hey, we had this conversation, so we'll talk about this tomorrow. Go to bed.
Yeah.
And maybe that's taking the car away. Maybe it's that they have to, I don't know, maybe the curfew got bumped up. Now it's 9 o'clock until you can prove that you can be here by 9, and then we can talk about it again. I will also say, I think Caleb said this earlier, it's easier to loosen up. So for your younger teens, setting maybe stricter boundaries so that you can loosen those. And then when they're a senior in high school, maybe the curfew is midnight or it's 1 o'clock on weekends. If you start with super loose boundaries, there's really nowhere to move it until they're already in the cliff.
Yeah.
And so having that thought too of as you're parenting or as you're a teacher, knowing at the beginning of the school year, here's where I'm going to set my boundaries, knowing I've got a little bit of wiggle room if this goes well.
And it gets them used to those boundaries and shows that they can be trusted when you do loosen them up.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, like, the second thing is invite their input. Let them speak into as maybe you are loosening up those boundaries of, hey, what do you think? You've been shown that you can be trusted. And so what's a reasonable curfew if we're running with that, or elite reasonable phone limit? And you might not necessarily have to go with exactly what they want, but you're able to invite their input.
Mm-hmm.
And going back also to being clear and consistent is also following up when a boundary is broken or crossed, right? If you get home past 10, make sure you follow up with, hey, this isn't okay, a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
If you said, hey, we'll talk about consequences, make sure you follow up with a consequence. So make sure that boundary is to be respected.
Mm-hmm.
And then whenever they do, continue to invite their input and have it be collaborative.
Well, and I would say too, the ultimate goal with boundaries is that your student, when they leave your home, will be able to do this on their own. You're helping them, you're modeling for them. And so even that inviting them into that input, you're giving them practice and setting, here's what I think is reasonable. And you can get feedback and y'all can have that conversation. But when they go off to college, when they start a job and they're on their own, they need to know, hey, I'm going to turn off work email at 5 o'clock when I leave. Otherwise, you have an adult who's working super late into the night because they don't have boundaries around that.
Yeah.
Or you have an adult who has no money in their bank account because they don't have boundaries around what I can and can't spend.
Yeah.
Or they don't have any friends because they're rude and interrupt people and aren't respectful of them. So coming up with things so that they can know, hey, here's what's appropriate and I can set this myself moving forward. And as always, for the Teen Life podcast, make sure that you're subscribing on YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. This season is almost over. And so you don't want to miss the last few. We're also looking at what comes in the future. So make sure that you're subscribed. If you want to give us questions for next season, you can email us at podcast@teenlife.ngo. You can DM us on social media as well. And we'll see you next time.